This is Radio TV Phono Nut, and I promised a repair video, or at least an attempted repair. Anyway, I hope we have luck with this. But what we have here is an older Library of Congress cassette book player for the blind. This is not a C1 machine. If you're a user of that service, you know very well what the infamous C1 cassette book machine is. They were offered from about 1981 up until, well, I don't know, 2013 or so, whenever the last magazines were on cassette. In fact, they printed a little message in the newsletter that they send out to everybody, probably about, I don't know, a year ago, requesting that everybody send their cassette book players back because they're obsolete and no longer used. Well, I sent them an email and told them that I still had stuff on cassette and would it be possible for me to hang on to mine. And they didn't reply to it, so I take that to mean that's a yes. So I'm hanging on to it. All they're going to do is throw it in a dumpster anyway. Alright, let's see what this one is. This was given to me by a friend who is also a talking book user. And it stopped working and was obsolete, and he was going to send it back, and they told him don't bother, just do whatever you want to with it. So he sent it to me. This particular model here is the model C79. It looks just like the C1, probably has the same innards as a C1, but this one is green in color where the C1 is yellow. I think the C76 through C79 were basically all the same player as the C1. The C80 model looked just like the C1 and the older models, except I think it had a couple of additional controls on the side for pitch restoration. That's where you could crank the speed of the cassette up and it not sound like Donald Duck. But they discontinued that model after 1 year and then went with the C1 in 81 through the end of the cassette era. But I think the C76 through C79 are basically the same machines except for the case color. The 76 was orange, the 77 was beige, the 78 was red, the 79 was green, and the C80 was brown, and the C1 was yellow. Alright, let's see what this does. I think I remember testing it when I got it, and I think it was... Now, for those who don't know, this is not like a commercially available cassette player. The cassette tapes look like a commercially available cassette, but the format in which they're recorded is different. This particular cassette is the instruction tape for the C77 machine, but the same instructions apply to this one. What makes these tapes different from ordinary commercially available cassettes is two things. The speed. Most Library of Congress cassette talking books for the blind are recorded at 15/16 inches per second versus the commercial speed of 1 7/8 inches per second. Now, some of the earliest cassette books for the blind from the early 70s were 1 7/8, but they soon switched to 15/16 early on. Another thing that makes these tapes different is the Library of Congress talking books contain up to 4 sides or tracks per cassette. So a C90 cassette recorded at 15/16 IPS with 4 tracks of information on it will provide up to 6 hours of playing time. And this machine here plays both 15/16, or excuse me, I'm getting off kilter here. This here will play both the older 2-side talking books and the 4-track or 4-side talking books. I think the 4-track books were introduced around 77. The ones before that were standard 2-track at either 15/16 or 1 7/8. These have a built-in battery pack, rechargeable battery pack, or they'll operate on AC, but they always discouraged you from running these on AC except for charging the battery, because if you leave them plugged in too long, it'll cause the battery to overheat and dry out. They didn't have any kind of circuitry to stop the charging process once the battery became charged. Now, really not complaining, because the Talking Book service is free to patrons, and when you have a problem with a machine, you just send it back and they'll either repair it or send you another one. But these Telex built cassette machines weren't the most reliable, and I can base that on my own experience with them. I generally get a year or two out of the C1 machines, and then something would happen to it and I'd have to send it back and they'd send me another one. Of course, now everything's on digital cartridges, so the cassettes and the older Talking Book records are phased out. But anyway, let's see what happens. It appears to be totally dead. Now, I seem to remember that if the battery pack dries out in these, they won't run on AC either. I think the battery sort of doubles as a filter capacitor. I'm not really sure how they're doing that. But let's see if there's a battery even still in this thing. Well, as you can tell, there's no battery to be had. I think this used a 7.2 volt nickel cadmium battery. Big battery that fits in this little space, and here are the two battery contacts. I guess I could go open my C1 machine, and which it's starting to fail now. The last time I used it, it was starting to do stupid junk, which is not surprising. Alright, let's open this up and see if we can make this work without the battery, or what can we do to make this work. You need a 1/4-inch nut driver to get the bottom panel off, but before you can access the screws, you have to pry out these little rubber feet, which can easily be done with a small flathead screwdriver. Okay, I gave you bogus information. I said these were 1/4-inch screws. They're not. They're smaller. And I'm supposed to have a nut driver that will get these out. Let's see if I can find it. Alright, so what's really needed is a 3/16 nut driver. Alright, here's the inside. This is the tape transport assembly, obviously. This looks like the electronic speed control board for the motor. This is our power transformer. This is our amplifier board here, and selector switches on this circuit board. This is has all our input jacks on this board and the power supply, which seems to be very simple. Just a secondary of a transformer feeding a half-wave rectifier here and our filter capacitors. So what we need to do is make sure we're getting juice to the power transformer and make sure there's something coming out of it. This really shouldn't be too difficult to troubleshoot. Alright, checking continuity across the primary of the power transformer. I've got 410 ohms, so we know we have a circuit across the primary. Alright, I'm measuring our AC coming out of the transformer, 13.5 volts, so that's good. So that tells us our trouble is somewhere in here. Okay, back on the dead C79 cassette player. I took the battery out of my C1 machine. This is what it looks like. It's a 7.2 volt rechargeable battery, which I think is about shot too. And the machine will run without the battery, or at least it powers up and turns. I didn't put a tape in it, which that's more than this one's doing. And yeah, you might notice the little blob is almost gone from or maybe completely gone from the lower left-hand corner from my camera. That's because I took the tape off and just glued the safety shutter thing open where it would stay open, and well, maybe now that'll look better too. Okay, so we're getting AC out of here. We're getting DC off of the rectifier diode here, so we know all of that's... Alright, well, I got a little action here. I turned the flywheel, and it started turning there for a second. Alright, when I turn this flywheel fast enough, I get some action, and we have this magnetic thingy here. Looks like some sort of a reed switch. And when this is turning, we get some action, but when this magnetic thing is not turning, nothing happens. Let's see if I can get some action here. Okay, this reed switch is working properly because whenever I rotate this wheel here, that portions of it appear to be magnetized, and a magnetic portion rolls past the reed switch. We get continuity, and when a non-magnetic part rolls by, it opens up. Now, with the belt taken off of the motor, and if I turn it on, it'll run for a couple of seconds and stop. But when I put the belt on, nothing happens. So I'm wondering if this motor is probably defective. It just hasn't got enough torque to run this thing. So if that's the case, this may end up going to the junk pile unless I can find a motor for it. Okay, if I keep turning this wheel by hand, the motor stays on, but if I allow the wheel to stop, the motor will stop, and the only way I can start it back again is to disengage the mechanism and then turn it back on and very quickly start rotating this wheel and while the motor's still running. Now, I'll admit working on these is kind of new to me too. My experience has been more with the record players and the cassette players. I think the only one I ever fixed, replaced a belt in one and cleaned the volume controls, but I didn't, the tone controls, but I didn't do any kind of in-depth analysis on one. Okay, I'm starting to think this one's going to be condemned. It does need belts, that's definite. This belt that runs the sensor wheel here, for lack of the proper term, is obviously old and weak. So is this one, but it's not enough that it shouldn't keep this from turning. In fact, it did turn one brief period off camera. But I think this motor is about shot. It just doesn't have enough torque to run this. With the belt off, I can make it turn. With the belt on, you can forget it. Here's the motor, and it's not your standard typical Chinese cassette player motor with two wires on it. Jayco DC servo motor type. See if I can read this through the viewfinder. Looks like TY7A. And yeah, this motor has 5 wires going to it. So like I said, not your typical cassette player motor. This is obviously a proprietary motor that was made for this mechanism. And I believe it's faulty because I can't find anything with the mechanism itself that would be jamming and placing too much pressure on the motor to load it down to nothing. So I don't know, this thing may just end up going into the parts bin. I was looking on eBay last night at these cassette players, and there's not so many of the older ones listed on there, but I found tons of C1 models in completed listings, and there's a good many of them for sale right now, and I can't believe the prices that they're selling for. Usually $50 to $75 on the low end, and over $300 on the upper end, with a good many of them selling in the $150 to $200 range. And I'm not talking about 1 or 2 bidders on each one. A couple of them I looked at had 40 or 50 bids on it. Now, I don't really know exactly what the draw is to these things. They weren't that great of a machine to begin with. And I don't imagine there's that many blind and visually impaired people left that haven't such an attachment for these things that they're wanting to bid them up to hundreds of dollars on eBay. In fact, if they were a user of the Library of Congress talking book program, then it'd be real stupid for them to bid them up that high, even pay anything for one, because chances are they have one that was loaned to them for free from the talking book library, unless the library made them send it back, which is highly unlikely. I did read somewhere where a lot of cassette tape people use these for various effects, using tape loops and that kind of thing. I don't know. I'm not really into that sort of thing. Couldn't prove it by me, but I just can't. I don't understand it. Running these things up to, on average, between $150 and over $300 bucks. It's just nuts. So I think we'll end this video right now. If I come up with any other reason why this thing is acting up, then you'll see a part 2. And if I determine it's the motor, and I can find one, which I believe it is the motor, we'll continue with this. But if not, you won't see a part 2. So we'll just call this a diagnosis of a C79 cassette player. About 10 or 12 years ago, a friend of mine had one of the last generation American printing house for the blind desktop cassette recorders, and the motor in that one went bad, and it was doing something similar to this one. It would run, but when you placed a load on it, it wouldn't run. But I was able to buy a motor at that time from APH for something like $5. I think I actually bought 2 of them, and I think I replaced the motor in that thing twice for him. It was one he used a great deal, but it was a more conventional motor. It wasn't something like this, and now they don't even offer part support for the cassette players anymore. I think they discontinued all of those in 2010, somewhere around there. The Telephone Pioneers of America is the group that usually repaired these library machines, but I doubt they even have any parts left for these. Okay, here's my official library-issued C1 cassette machine. I don't know exactly how old it is, but this is one of the later models. As you can see, it has the newer style power cord, and I think those were first introduced around 98 or 99. I found some dates on the inside of the battery compartment cover where it had been serviced, and 2003 and 4 were the oldest dates I found, so obviously it's no newer than that. As you can see, the inside of it is identical to this one, the old C79 machine, so I'm inclined to believe that these things basically remain the exact same machine from the C76 model all the way on up through the C1 model, for the exception of the C80 that had the pitch restoration feature on it. And if I hadn't already mentioned it, the model number generally indicates the model year that the machine was first introduced, as in C76 was 76, C79 was 1979, although I saw a 1980 date code on the speaker in this one. C1 was supposed to be 1981, but instead of calling it C81, they just called it C1 and just kept that model in production. So looking at my machine, I figured out what's going on here. This doesn't have the traditional type tension style auto stop lever like most cassette decks do, as in when the tape reaches the end or the tape jams, the tape applies tension to a mechanical lever, and it causes the corresponding function key that's depressed to disengage. This one doesn't work like that. Instead, we have this reed switch in a wheel that has magnetic portions on it, and what that reed switch wants to see is that wheel constantly spinning, causing a pulse to be generated, which is sent to the auto stop circuitry. If the auto stop circuitry detects a constantly closed or a constantly open reed switch, it will shut the machine off. I've got a tape in my machine now. Let's see if it'll play. This one had been kind of acting up too, so we may have 2 broke ones on our hands.
Adjacent to the green play key you have already pushed, there are 4 other keys.
Yeah, the problem with this one was the volume dropping out.
Find a red key with a raised X. This is the stop key,
which appears to be a bad solder connection.
When you are ready to start again, push the green play key and the recording will continue from the point where you left off. You may push the stop key any time during these instructions if you wish to locate keys or switches being described. Then just push the green play.
Okay, I'm going to take the tape out now. I'm going to engage. Okay, there again, I thought I was recording and I wasn't. That's the second time I've done that in however many years. But anyway, I want you to pay attention to the gray wheel. I'm going to engage fast forward. As you can see, the wheel is turning and the motor is turning, but if I stop the wheel, the motor will run for a few seconds and then stop. Now when I release the wheel, nothing happens, but if I manually kick start it, it starts up again. And the same thing happens with play. Stop the wheel, it shuts off. Now in rewind, it won't stay engaged because the belt that runs this is attached to our take-up spindle, and of course that's not moving during rewind. If a tape was inserted, it would be moving, but it's not. So that's how the auto stop feature on here works. Now, if we have a bad motor, which appears to be the case with the green machine, none of this is going to turn, which means this wheel is not going to turn, which means the machine will appear to be dead. Now I guess while I have this apart, I need to fix the audio problem that's causing this one to cut in and out, which appears to be a bad solder connection on this board here. So we'll let my iron warm up, and then I'll just go over this board and see if that solves the problem. I think the problem is our headphone jack.
To the right of the plate, you'll find another black key marked by a raised arrow pointing to the right. This is the fast forward key. When this key is pressed down, the tape will move rapidly to the right, and garbled sounds may again be heard. The rewind and fast forward keys allow you to...
Alright, I sprayed some contact cleaner in the headphone jack, and hopefully that solved the problem.
To the right. Behind the side switch is the speed selector switch. New titles being added to the program are produced for playing at 15/16 inches per second. To play these 15/16 inches per second cassettes, push the speed switch down to the left. Older titles produced for the program and those available commercially play at 1 7/8 inches per second. To play the faster 1 7/8 inches per second cassettes, press the speed selector switch down to the right. The speed of the tape can be varied using the slide control nearest the rear of the machine. When this control is pushed all the way to the left, the tape will play at the speed set by the speed switch. If this control is moved slightly to the right, the tape will immediately slow down. Advancing this control farther to the right gradually increases the speed from slower than normal to much faster than normal. Playing a tape at slower or faster than normal distorts the narrator's voice.
Well, duh.
Your C77 cassette book machine is equipped with a rechargeable battery pack which must not be removed. When the power cord, located in a storage compartment in the rear of the machine, is plugged into a wall outlet, battery charging is automatic. A full charge for a rundown battery takes about 12 hours. After completely charging the battery, the machine will operate for at least 6 hours. You may leave the power cord plugged into an outlet at all times, as the battery cannot be overcharged.
And later years, they told us not to leave them plugged in.
Metal knobs for an over-the-shoulder carrying strap. The strap is available through your library. On the right side of the cassette book machine is a panel of holes, or jacks, which can be used to connect other equipment. Each of the jacks has a raised letter or symbol beneath it. The jack nearest the front, with a raised R below it, allows use of a remote on-off control.
So this one will be tabled until I can find a suitable motor to put in it.
The second jack from the front, marked by a raised O, is an auxiliary output and allows the cassette book machine to be connected directly to a home sound system. Connecting cords may be obtained from a local audio supply store. The third jack, marked by a raised I, is an auxiliary input for future equipment. The fourth and fifth jacks are for headphone use. Each is marked by a raised inverted U, symbolizing a pair of headphones. The fourth jack...
All right, there you go. More to come later.